So good morning, everyone. My name is Olga Peña. I am a biomedical scientist and a volunteer for the Canadian Science Policy Conference. Today we have Mr. David Mair, who is the responsible for this knowledge management at the Joint Research Center. So thank you for being here with us. Can you tell us a bit more about the work at the Joint Research Center and what does it make it unique?
Thank you, Olga. It's great to be here. So the Joint Research Centre is the science and knowledge service of the European Commission. So we are a research department inside the European Commission, which is the executive branch of the European Union. So we're a full department along with the transport and energy departments. But our job is to create and manage the knowledge that our policy-making colleagues need to make European Union policies. And my particular job is to think about how we can improve the relationship between science and policy in the EU.
Fantastic. So, for what I read, you have also worked at the European Commission's Directorate General for Health and Consumers. So can you tell us a bit more about your role and lessons learned in this position?
Yes, I spent most of my career actually as a policymaker, so I'm not a scientist. So when I moved over to work in the Joint Research Centre, it was quite a change to move from a policymaking environment to a much more scientific one. But when I was working as a policymaker, I worked on consumer protection regulation and enforcement. And then latterly, I ended up managing a team of economists to help understand how Europe functions for consumers in economic terms, so looking at prices, looking at consumer detriment, consumer harm, looking at how markets are functioning in terms of dealing with consumer complaints and problems. And I learned a very important lesson out of that if you want to make policy and convince people to change the regulations and laws, you do need a robust evidence base. You simply cannot make any progress in trying to improve conditions for consumers in this case without having a very strong evidence base. So I was very pleased to spend 5 years building that evidence base.
Fantastic.
And providing the evidence that the politicians could then go and say, look, we need to do something to protect European consumers.
Fantastic, that's great to know. So you will be part today of the panel Scientists as Conveners and Ambassadors of Facts. So will you provide a sneak peek of your input or your views in this subject?
Sure. I think the main message I'm going to try and get across today is that the model that many scientists carry around in their heads of how science policy works, that it's simply a question of getting the facts across, and if only you can sit down with the policymakers, get them to sit still and listen to you, then all will be well. That so-called deficit model of science policy, I hope I can get across the idea that it's simply broken. It doesn't work. If you want to influence policy, then you need to change quite radically how you go about it. You need to spend the time to really understand policy, and you also need to spend time to understand the psychological processes behind how people think about facts and science and how they think about politics and how they take decisions. So I'm really going to make a plea for what we're calling a sort of a new age of reason or a new enlightenment, that we need to bring the insights that we now have from cognitive and behavioral sciences about how we think and decide into the business of science policy. So then we can really start to rethink this relationship about how people use facts and process them in taking policy decisions.
So scientists have a good role in that perspective, but also now, especially now here in Canada, especially junior scientists or trainees are becoming more and more interested into science policy and the idea of getting a career outside academia and continuing that path. Will you give any advice in that sense, and will your center have any kind of like training programs or fellowships that they can apply to?
So my advice would be don't get hung up on one particular scientific discipline. If possible, gain at least some sort of understanding of other scientific disciplines. If you're a natural scientist, start having some insights into social science and vice versa, because policymakers never want one particular piece of science. They need a joined up, integrated piece of science. So if you want to influence policy, if you are good at connecting different bits of knowledge, that is going to be very, very powerful. I think the second thing I would say is if you want to influence policy, you have to try and understand policy making from the inside. So you need to start getting in and understanding what are the issues and what is the timing of the policy debate. So a very simple thing to do is start using Twitter. Twitter is the social network of politics and policy making. So if you think there's an issue out there that you have something to add, find out who are the crucial people who are commenting on Twitter and start following them, and then you'll begin to see how you can insert your science into the policy debate at the right place, at the right time. So we in the JRC, we have something like over 2,000 scientists doing science, pretty much huge range of science, all policies. And part of my job is to bring in some training for scientists and policymakers, and we're beginning to do that. So we do run a number of programs which are open to other people. It's a bit difficult to get Canadians to come and work with us because if you want to be employed in the Joint Research Centre, you need to have a European passport.
Makes sense.
But many Canadians do, so that may still be possible. In which case, yes, there are certainly jobs working at the interface of science and policy. We also run summer schools every year, training young scientists and policymakers in how to influence each other. And we work with organisations such as the Global Young Academy on that. And we haven't had any Canadians yet, but in principle, yeah, Canadians should be able to come along to that. So if anyone is interested in trying to find out what we're doing, we have something called the Evidence for Policy Community. So if you type JRC Evidence for Policy Community into Google, you should come to our online space. So please come and join our community.
That is fantastic advice. So from your experience here at the CSPC, would you provide your thoughts on the value of this conference from what you have experienced so far?
I go to quite a few of these conferences, but I have to say so far after one day, this one has really impressed me. The quality of the people here, the thinking they are doing about science policy is very, very high compared to the global standard. So there's really quite a healthy biodiversity of science policy thinking in Canada, which is fantastic. So for me, these sorts of conferences are the places where you come to hear new ideas, to make new connections. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, influencing policy is all about having a good network of connections. So for me, this work is essential to be done through these sorts of networking events. I couldn't imagine a better way to do it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. So, well, thank you for being here with us, and hopefully you continue to enjoy the conference.
I think so. Thanks, Olga.